A wedding meant to dispel misfortune made me Anthony's new bride. However, a month later, my husband Anthony passed away from illness, and I became a widow directly. Look, that's Anthony's new wife, married for less than a month. Well, now she's a widow. At the funeral, the whispers of the crowd cut into my heart like knives. Just as I was preparing to leave silently, the lawyer read the will. All property is to be inherited by Flora. What's even more shocking is that to successfully inherit the estate, I must also raise Anthony's 5-year-old son George from his previous marriage. I stood on the edge of the wealthy family's funeral, the black mourning clothes making my already fair skin appear even paler. The gazes of the crowd around me were like countless sharp knives, continuously stabbing into me. There were people whispering, but deliberately making their voices louder, glancing at me from time to time. Hey, look, that's Anthony's new wife. She's been married for less than a month, and her husband has already passed away. I heard that Anthony only married her to ward off misfortune, but then he died. Now she's ended up a widow. I lowered my head, biting my lip, and clenched the handkerchief in my hand tightly. I had expected these words long ago, but when I actually heard them, I couldn't help but feel the grievance and humiliation in my heart. Yeah, I'm Flora, just a pitiful tool person. At this moment, Anthony's coffin is filled with white flowers, while his photo is covered with a black veil, making his expression indistinguishable. In just 1 month of marriage, I actually knew less about my husband than I would about a stranger. The reading of the will is about to begin. Please family members move to the reception room. The butler's voice interrupted my thoughts. When I followed the crowd into the reception room, Anthony's relatives had already taken their seats. Actually, I could have chosen not to come in. To them, I was just an insignificant passerby. Of course, I think so too. After all, Anthony's estate would never be divided with someone like me who's just a tool. But as Anthony's legal wife, it doesn't seem right to leave at this time. I glanced around, feeling hesitant. I really didn't know where would be appropriate to sit. At that moment, a middle-aged woman gave me a cold look, moved inward with some disdain, and made room for me at the edge. The lawyer was a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses, wearing a serious expression. He cleared his throat and began to read the will. I, Anthony, being of sound mind and voluntarily make this will. I listened absent-mindedly, wondering where I should go after the funeral. Suddenly, the lawyer's voice became clear. All my property, including but not limited to 51% of the group's shares, 3 properties, and various investment returns, shall be inherited in full by my legal wife, Flora. What? I jerked my head up, completely unable to believe my ears. The living room erupted in an instant. This is impossible. She just married into the family how long ago? And she gets the entire inheritance? It must be forged. The lawyer paid no attention to their clamor, scanned the crowd, then banged forcefully on the table, raising his voice a few more decibels. Quiet, please. The will bears the notary office's seal and is completely legal and valid. Before I could recover from the shock, I heard the lawyer continue reading. Additionally, I hope that Flora can raise my son George, whom I had with my ex-wife, until he reaches adulthood. If this clause is violated, all assets will be transferred to Jean George's name, to be held in trust by the family elders. My gaze involuntarily drifted to the little boy in the corner, feeling somewhat worried. 5-year-old George Jean clung tightly to the nanny's clothes, his small frame seemingly ready to be blown away by the wind at any moment. He looked at me, his large grape-like black eyes filled with confusion and fear. After the lawyer finished reading, the living room turned into a chaotic battlefield. Their accusations against me rose and fell in waves, while I stood at the center of the storm, my mind completely blank, at a loss for what to do. Just then, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. I instinctively answered the phone and walked to a nearby corner. Hello? Is this Flora? A woman's voice came from the other end of the line, choked with tears yet unable to hide the sharpness in her tone. I'm Harriet, Anthony's ex-wife. I heard he died. Is it true? My heart skipped a beat. Harriet. The woman who abandoned her husband and children and ran off with the company's money. Surprised, I didn't know how to talk to her and could only say briefly, yes. Okay, I'll return to the country immediately. Her voice suddenly became stern, the tearful tone disappearing without a trace. Listen, Flora, whatever promises Anthony made to you, those are all mine. My son, my family property, no one can touch them. Do you know who I am? Anthony's meager family fortune means nothing to me. Miss Harriet, Mr. Anthony's will has already. Will, she interrupted me in a sharp voice, that kind of thing is just a worthless piece of paper once torn. I'll show you what real power is. Flora, let me give you some advice, get out of Anthony's house as soon as possible, otherwise. Her threat was not finished when the phone suddenly cut off. Holding my mobile phone, I felt a chill spreading from the soles of my feet to my whole body, not knowing where to go. I turned to look at Jean-Georges, and he was also looking up at me. Early the next morning, as soon as I had made a cup of tea, my phone started vibrating frantically. Several friends sent me messages one after another, all with the same news link: tycoon's ex-wife returns, fighting for deceased husband's estate and child custody. I clicked on the video and saw at the airport exit, Harriet dressed in black mourning clothes, her eyes red-rimmed, surrounded by camera flashes. She dabbed the corner of her eye with a tissue, her voice choked with emotion. When I heard the news about Anthony's passing, I rushed back immediately to see our child. She sniffled, and tears gushed out as if a switch had been flipped. George is the apple of my eye. I've been living in torment all these years. How I've longed to see him. Then why did you leave back then? A reporter asked. Harriet's expression froze for a moment, then she cried even more miserably. It was all a misunderstanding. I was forced to leave. Now I just want to get my child back, he needs his mother's love. I turned off the video and felt my stomach churn. Harriet's performance was utterly disgusting. Just as I put down my phone, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Harriet standing outside the door, exuding an imposing presence, followed by two tall bodyguards and a middle-aged man in a suit. I pretended to be calm and opened the door. This must be Miss Flora? The man in a suit forced a fake smile and handed over his business card. I am Miss Harriet's lawyer. Harriet didn't wait for me to react, pushing the door directly open, her high heels making a piercing sound on the marble floor. She surveyed the living room, her eyes filled with greed and contempt. This house, it was Anthony and I who decorated it together. Her voice carried deliberate sadness, then turned to sharp sarcasm. So, how is it, bride of good fortune? Are you living comfortably? Hey, I'm talking to you. She approached me in high heels, her heavy perfume nearly suffocating me. A marriage of less than a month and you want to swallow Anthony's assets? In your dreams. At this moment, George rubbed his eyes and walked out of the bedroom. Seeing the strangers in the living room, he asked somewhat confusedly, Auntie, who are these people? Harriet immediately put on a motherly expression and walked quickly toward George. Darling, it's Mommy. Don't you remember me? George was startled by her sudden enthusiasm and kept backing away until he was behind me, his small hand still tightly clutching the corner of my clothes. George, don't be afraid. I crouched down, soothing him gently. Seeing this, Harriet's face instantly darkened. Flora, what kind of spell have you cast on my son? That he would even refuse to recognize his own mother. Miss Harriet, George is just not used to suddenly seeing strangers. I stood up, trying to remain calm. Stranger, she shrieked with a laugh, I'm his mother. And you, an outsider, have no right to pretend to be the dutiful wife here. She turned to the lawyer. Record this woman is deliberately provoking conflict between mother and son, destroying family bonds. The lawyer nodded and said to me with a sinister tone, Miss Flora, we have already submitted the lawsuit to the court. Request to revoke the part of the will regarding property inheritance and apply for custody of George. After all, blood relationship is something that no law can deny. I'll have a lawyer handle this. I didn't want to say another word to them. Judging by their attitude, they seemed to think they had me completely cornered. Harriet sneered, Go ahead, suit yourself. but don't expect to win. Remember, everything belongs to me. You're just a substitute bought to ward off bad luck. You'd better take some money and leave cleanly while you can. It would be better for everyone that way." After she finished speaking, she bent down to approach George, but the child dodged her. This made her extremely furious, and before leaving, she didn't forget to threaten me, "Flora, you just wait." After the door slammed shut, I realized my palms were covered in sweat. That night, my phone was almost flooded with online messages. Topics like mourning widow abuses stepson, Anthony's widow battles ex-wife for custody, and so on trended on social media. The comment section was flooded with overwhelming abuse and questioning. I had no choice but to turn off my phone, with tears welling up in my eyes, yet I stubbornly refused to let them fall. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the photo frame on the desk. It was a picture of Anthony and George, both smiling brightly. But Harriet wasn't there. An instinct told me that things were far from as simple as they seemed. Anthony's dying request, and Harriet's sudden appearance, it was all too much of a coincidence. I opened the desk drawer, wanting to look through Anthony's belongings for possible clues. The bottom drawer was locked, but I didn't know where the key was. "Auntie." Suddenly, George's timid voice came from the doorway. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I hurried over and picked him up. "Is that Auntie really my mommy?" His big eyes were filled with confusion. I didn't know how to answer, as Anthony had never mentioned this to me. Helpless, I could only ask softly in return, "Do you remember her?" George shook his head, "I don't. But the perfume on her, it frightens me." "The scent of perfume?" My heart stirred, as if I had grasped something, but then I caught nothing. Looking at the 5-year-old George before me, my heart ached, and a protective instinct rose within me. "George, don't be afraid. I'm here for you, I'll protect you, let's cheer on together." I know that woman is here to take me away, but I don't want to leave you." "Auntie, let's pinky promise, you won't leave me, okay?" George looked at me with pleading eyes, extending his chubby little finger. A wave of sadness washed over me. In this dramatic marriage, I was the one who suffered all the grievances, but George was even more pitiful. I reached out and hooked my little finger with his, feeling a heart-to-heart connection. "Come on, pinky promise for 100 years, no take-backs." George smiled happily, just like in the photo, beaming brightly. I seem to have heard people say that memory is particularly good when one is happy, so I quickly took advantage of his happy moment and said, "George, Auntie needs your help too. Auntie wants to know, did Dad leave anything for you? Like a letter, or, yes." George's eyes lit up, and he took out a small key from his pocket. "Dad gave this to me. He said if he ever left me one day, I should give it to someone who could protect me." I looked at the key with mixed feelings. After only a month together, George had come to see me as his most trusted person. And I, in turn, felt an inexplicable closeness to him. After finally getting George to fall asleep, I eagerly returned to Anthony's study. The small key George had given me seemed to be a perfect match for the drawer lock. As I turned the key, my hands couldn't help but tremble. The drawer opened. Inside was only a craft paper bag and a USB flash drive. The words "Top Secret" were written on the bag in black ink, the handwriting neat yet somewhat hurried. I carefully opened the paper bag and found several documents and some photos. The photos showed Harriet intimately embracing a strange man, with what appeared to be a foreign resort in the background. The date noted on the back of the photo was exactly 1 month before Harriet's disappearance. I flipped through a few more documents, which contained bank transfer records showing that a large sum of money had been transferred out of Anthony's company account before Harriet left. Is this the truth of what happened back then? She wasn't forced to leave, but it was all planned? I'm quite shocked. If all this is true, then Harriet is so shameless. How could she betray her conscience and show her face here again? To have the audacity to say such shameless boastful words. Just then, my phone suddenly rang, startling me so much that I almost dropped the files on the floor. After calming myself down, I answered the phone. It was the lawyer I had hired. Miss Flora, the custody hearing is scheduled for 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow, you need to be prepared. I tightened my grip on the documents in my hand. I understand, thank you. One more thing, the lawyer's voice lowered, the other party has hired attorney Howard, who is very cunning in family court. You should be prepared. Hanging up the phone, I felt a wave of weakness wash over me. I knew nothing about the law. What could I do against a seasoned expert like Harriet? Just as I was thinking this, the doorbell rang again. Who could be visiting at this late hour? I carefully walked to the door and through the peephole saw a strange middle-aged man, dressed in a suit and wearing black-rimmed glasses. Are you? Miss Flora, he said politely. I'm Tom, Mr. Anthony's former private lawyer. This is my lawyer's license. I glanced briefly at his ID through the peephole and opened the door with some caution. Hello, what can I do for you? Lawyer Tom looked around and lowered his voice. Could I have a word with you in private? Preferably in Mr. Anthony's study. In the study, Lawyer Tom saw the documents on the table and nodded. It seems you've already found the first part. Part 1? I was a bit confused. Mr. Anthony was very cautious. He scattered things in different places. Lawyer Tom took out an envelope from his briefcase. This is what he left for you. He said I could only give this to you after you found that key. There was only a note in the envelope. Check the contents of the USB drive. The password is a combination of George's birthday and our wedding date. Anthony. Lawyer Tom said cautiously, I hope these things will be helpful to you. I nodded, thank you. He sighed, I can only tell you that Mr. Anthony is a far-sighted person. He told me that everything he arranged was to protect the person he loves most. Before leaving, he left me with a sentence, you should look into that accident from 5 years ago. I walked him all the way to the door. After returning, I quickly turned on my computer and inserted the USB drive. After entering the password, numerous files and photos appeared on the screen. I was speechless at what I discovered. Anthony had been investigating Harriet all these years. Just then, my phone rang again. It was a text message from the court. The custody hearing had been moved up to tomorrow. Does the court never get off work? Harriet is terrifying. I had to hurriedly organize my materials to prepare. At the hearing the next day, Harriet performed the role of a devoted mother throughout, with tears coming at will and a moving, sorrowful tone. Your Honor, I was forced to leave. My husband was abusing me at the time, and I had to escape. But I think of my children every day. As she spoke, she took out a pile of so-called letters and gifts for the children from her bag, claiming that Anthony had prevented her from contacting the children. I watched those obviously newly bought souvenirs with burning anger, but as a legal novice, my rebuttal seemed pale and powerless. To make matters worse, several relatives also testified in court, claiming that I got along very poorly with George and often neglected his needs. Hearing these words that turned black into white, I trembled with anger. My lawyer was also somewhat helpless in this matter. The result came out quickly, with the court temporarily granting Harriet visitation rights 3 days a week until the final ruling. I won the first step, little bride. Walking out of the courthouse, Harriet whispered triumphantly in my ear, just watch, next I'll get back both the children and all the property. When I got home, George threw himself into my arms as soon as he saw me. Auntie, I don't want to go with that woman. The perfume on her makes me sick. I held him tightly. Don't worry, I won't let anyone take you away. But in my heart, I knew that with my current strength, I could hardly resist Harriet's attack. That night, I continued to organize materials in Anthony's study, hoping to find more evidence. Suddenly, I saw a highly encrypted folder in the USB drive named Hospital Records. It took me a full 2 hours to finally crack the password. The folder contained Anthony and George's medical examination reports from recent years, with the last one from 2 months ago. As I read through them carefully, a line of medical terminology suddenly caught my attention. Comparing it with explanations online, I gradually understood what it meant and couldn't help but gasp. Early the next morning, George came down with a high fever. I rushed him to the hospital, and along the way, he leaned dazedly against me, his little hand tightly clutching the corner of my clothes. "Don't be afraid, you'll be better soon," I whispered to comfort him, but my heart was racing with anxiety. The doctor gave him an injection and said he needed to stay for observation. I stayed by the hospital bed, not leaving his side for a moment. In the middle of the night, George's fever got worse, and he talked in his sleep. "Mom, don't go." His little hand gripped my finger as tears streamed down his cheeks. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." I held his little hand, looking at him with a heart full of pain, unable to hold back my tears. Just then, he suddenly opened his eyes, became clear for a moment, called out "Mom," and then drifted back into a drowsy sleep. That single word "Mom" completely melted my heart. I knew that no matter the cost, I had to protect this child. I would never let the tragedy from 5 years ago happen again. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the sound of hurried high heels echoed through the hospital corridor. Harriet pushed open the ward door and shouted angrily, "I received a call from the hospital saying my son is sick. How are you taking care of him?" I ignored her and continued to wipe the sweat from George's forehead. "Move aside." She pushed me. "I'm taking him to the best hospital." George was awakened by the noise, and when he saw Harriet, he was so frightened that he shrank into my arms. "Mom, I don't want to go with her." The word "Mom" made Harriet's face change dramatically. She glared at me fiercely. "Did you teach him to call you that? Flora, you've gone too far." I protectively held George tight. "Please leave, the child needs to rest." "Good, very good," Harriet said through gritted teeth. "Tomorrow you will receive a court summons, and I will make the judge see clearly how you've been driving a wedge between my son and me." After she left, I breathed a sigh of relief and looked at George, who had fallen asleep in my arms again. I dialed a number. "Mr. Tom, I need your help. Regarding the accident 5 years ago, I think I know what it was." There was a few seconds of silence on the phone, and Lawyer Tom's voice became more cautious. "Miss Flora, this matter is not suitable to be discussed over the phone. I will come to see you tomorrow morning." After hanging up the phone, I gently held George's little hand. The moment this child called me Mom just now keeps replaying in my mind. I never thought I would form such a deep bond with a child, but right now, I'm willing to do anything to protect him. 5 years ago, I missed my chance to be a mom. Now, I don't want to lose it again. Early the next morning, while George was still asleep, I took Lawyer Tom to the rest area at the end of the hospital corridor. "You say you know about the accident from 5 years ago?" Lawyer Tom pushed up his glasses, his expression somewhat grave. I nodded. "I checked the USB drive left by Anthony last night, which contains the medical examination reports of George and Anthony. Mr. Tom, although I'm not a medical professional, I can tell from that blood type test that George cannot possibly be Harriet's biological child." Lawyer Tom took a deep breath. "Mr. Anthony knew you would discover this. That's also why he chose you." "Chose me?" "Yes. He never does anything without being certain." Lawyer Tom took a small decoder out of his briefcase. "This was also given to me by Mr. Anthony before he passed away. He said I should only give it to you when things became most critical. I think now is the time." When George woke up, the doctor examined him and said everything was normal, and he could be discharged to go home to rest. After returning home, once George fell asleep again, I couldn't wait to connect the decoder to the USB drive. Instantly, a hidden folder appeared, named Plan. I opened the first file, a video recorded by Anthony. His gaunt face appeared on the screen, but his eyes were exceptionally determined. "If you're watching this video, it means I'm no longer in this world, and you found the clues I left behind." His voice was somewhat weak, but very clear. "Flora, I must confess to you, our marriage originated from a plan of mine, a plan to seek justice for George and myself." I held my breath, staring intently at the screen. 5 years ago, Harriet had an affair during her pregnancy and planned to run away with the money. Just before she was about to flee, she went into premature labor, but the baby passed away due to various complications. At that time, I had already obtained evidence of her affair and embezzlement and was preparing to expose her. But she had a mental breakdown after childbirth, fled overnight, and took a large amount of company money with her. Anthony paused, a flicker of pain in his eyes. I had intended to reveal everything, but then I suddenly realized this would be a good opportunity to teach her a lesson. So I concealed the fact that the child had died and announced that I had a son. He gave a wry smile. What a coincidence. The very next day I found a welfare home, and there happened to be a newborn baby who had been abandoned just 3 or 4 days earlier. So, through proper channels, I adopted this child, and he is George. I gave him the best of everything, not because he was a substitute, but because I truly loved him. I treated him as my own son. I froze, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. Over the years, I had been collecting evidence of Harriet's crimes, planning to expose everything when George was older. But my condition worsened too quickly. Anthony's face showed apology. I need someone who can continue my plan and protect George. Flora, I've been observing you for a long time. You are kind, strong, and most importantly, you have a sincere heart. In the subsequent folders, Anthony collected evidence of Harriet's crimes, scanned copies of forged accounting records, email correspondence with her lover, and a detailed explanation of how she embezzled public funds. What shocked me the most was a folder labeled Adoption. Inside were George's adoption certificate, photos of the Welfare Institute where the procedures were handled that year, and a group photo of Anthony with the staff from the Welfare Institute. George was originally an abandoned child, and it was Anthony who gave him a new life and endless love. This was the accident from 5 years ago. I muttered to myself, filled with mixed emotions. Before I could think further, the doorbell rang. I quickly shut down the computer and hid the USB drive. The visitors were Harriet and her lawyer. The court has issued a temporary custody order, and today is my visitation day. Harriet waved the document in her hand triumphantly. I'm taking George out for the day. I bit my lip. He just got out of the hospital, and the doctor said he needs rest. This is a right protected by law, you can't stop him. The lawyer behind her said coldly. I had to let George go out with them, but before leaving, I secretly slipped George a smartwatch. If you feel uncomfortable at all, just press this button, and I'll come pick you up immediately. George nodded nervously and reluctantly left with Harriet. I was restless all afternoon until evening when my phone suddenly sounded George's distress signal. I immediately located their position, and it was actually the airport. I rushed over just in time to see Harriet dragging an unwilling George toward the international departure area. Stop. I rushed forward and grabbed George. Harriet's expression changed. What are you doing? I'm just taking my son on a trip. Does a trip require a 1-month visa and a one-way ticket? I demanded, pointing at the plane ticket in her hand. Are you trying to smuggle him out of the country? The surrounding security personnel were drawn over, Harriet's face dark. Don't think you can defeat me. Just you wait, I will definitely make you pay. When I got home, I hugged the frightened George tightly. It's okay, George, Mom is here. In that moment, I made a decision. I must complete Anthony's plan, not just for his last wish, but more importantly, to protect George. And also, to continue my life as a mom. That evening, I contacted Attorney Tom again. Attorney Tom, I need your full assistance. We must resolve Harriet's threat once and for all. On the phone, Lawyer Tom's voice was firm. Mr. Anthony was right to choose you. I'll prepare everything. Let's work together to complete his unfinished revenge plan. Hanging up the phone, I looked out at the night sky. I had no other choice. For George, for our future, I had to fight. In the blink of an eye, only 3 days remain until the final trial. Harriet is obviously quite competent. When I opened social media, I saw her interview with a financial magazine. I'm looking forward to bringing my son home next week. This nightmare is finally coming to an end. The accompanying photo showed her dressed in designer brands, wearing sunglasses while standing next to a luxury car. This woman is really arrogant. Ding dong, the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Lawyer Tom standing outside the door holding a stack of documents, followed by a middle-aged man behind him. Miss Flora, this is Evan, the private detective hired by Mr. Anthony before his passing, Lawyer Tom introduced. Evan looked quite ordinary, but his eyes were exceptionally sharp. Without another word, he directly handed me a USB drive. "Miss Flora, this contains all of Harriet's whereabouts records and financial transactions abroad over the past 5 years." The three of us studied the battle plan at the dining table. Lawyer Tom spread out a document. "We found the former accountant who was in charge of the company's accounts back then. She's willing to testify in court about how Harriet altered the accounts and transferred funds." Evan continued, "I also tracked down Harriet's overseas bank account from that year, and the amount exactly matches the company's missing funds." As I looked through these materials, hope gradually rose in my heart. "There is one more crucial piece of evidence," said Lawyer Tom mysteriously. "When Mr. Anthony was alive, he secretly kept a DNA sample of Harriet's. We can request a DNA comparison in court to prove that George is not her biological child." I looked up abruptly. Could this harm George? I didn't expect that my first reaction would be to protect George, to keep him from any harm at all. Perhaps only those who have become mothers can understand this kind of behavior. And George's repeated calls of Mom opened up a new chapter in my life. Lawyer Tom was silent for a moment, then acknowledged my idea. "This is our final card, to be used only as a last resort." I nodded slowly. "I understand. What about custody? Will the judge consider the child's wishes? Is George willing to testify in court?" This question made me hesitate. Would it be too cruel to subject a 5-year-old child to the pressure of court and media? I never thought about using George as a weapon, not even against Harriet. "I need to think about this some more," I finally said. After they left, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Flora, if you know what's good for you, admit defeat early," Harriet's voice came from the other end of the line. "You can't beat me." I sneered. "Is that so? We'll see about that. Don't think you can win just because you found some evidence. Let me tell you this, money makes the world go round. When the judge makes the final decision, you'll get nothing." I ignored her threat and hung up the phone directly. This phone call only strengthened my determination. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast for George, he suddenly grabbed my hand. "Mom, I heard you talking with Uncle Lawyer last night." I was startled. "You heard everything?" George nodded. "I know that Auntie wants to take me away, but I don't want to go with her." He looked up with his little face, his eyes determined, unlike that of a 5-year-old child. "I can speak in court, I'm not afraid." For an instant, my nose tingled. This child, only 5 years old, already understands how to make choices for his own life. I crouched down, looking him in the eye. "George, are you sure? The court will have many people, it will be noisy, and they might ask you some difficult questions." "As long as Mom is here, I'm not afraid," he said seriously. "Dad said that a man should be brave." I held him tightly, my tears flowing uncontrollably. "Okay, then let's cheer on together." That afternoon, we received a gift sent by Harriet, a large bouquet of black roses and a card that read, "You're going to lose ugly." Faced with this blatant threat, I didn't panic. Instead, I took a photo and saved it as another piece of evidence. In the evening, I noticed a suspicious black car parked outside the villa, clearly watching our movements. Harriet indeed became nervous and started to act frantically. But I no longer had the initial fear. They say motherhood makes a woman strong, and now I am George's mother. After George fell asleep, I came to the study and played the recording Anthony left behind. "Flora, if you're hearing this recording, it means you've reached the final stage." Anthony's voice, though weak, was filled with power. "I apologize for my choices, but not for my plan. I apologize to you. Harriet must pay for what she has done. I knew long ago that my days were numbered, so I meticulously planned all of this. I chose you not only because you are kind and strong, but because I saw that hidden wish in your eyes. You lost a child once, didn't you?" I covered my mouth in shock. How could he possibly know? That was the deepest secret buried in my heart, the accident 5 years ago that cost me the chance to become a mother. Don't ask me how I know. Actually, we met 5 years ago. I know you might not believe me when I say this, but it's just such a coincidence that we have indeed met before. On the day my child with Harriet died, I was overwhelmed with grief. I hated Harriet for failing to protect my son. I hated her irresponsibility for killing my son. I just hid alone in a corner of the hospital and cried my heart out. When I had cried myself tired and could cry no more, I noticed a girl in hospital maternity clothes not far away, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes, tears still streaming down her face. Hearing this, I could no longer control my tears, which gushed out like a spring. Yes, it's him, the handsome man in the suit who was crying his heart out in the corner of the hospital. 5 years ago, we did meet. That day, I lost my son, also in that corner, crying my eyes out. When I had cried myself out and could cry no more, he arrived, crying even more miserably than I. I just watched him silently, while he wailed loudly and I shed silent tears. Everyone who cries has something heartbreaking to grieve. If there are no tears, it's only because the heart hasn't been hurt deeply enough. Zhang Mo's voice continued, pulling me back to reality. I saw regret in her eyes, saw frustration, and also saw unwillingness. The two stared at each other for a long time, neither speaking. Later I found out that she got pregnant before marriage, and on the 3rd day after giving birth, she was abandoned by that scumbag. What's even more hateful is that the scumbag also took their son away, and there has been no news of him since. Do you remember now? That girl was you. Here I must ask for your forgiveness once again. Because from the very moment I formulated my revenge plan, I had already factored you in, which is why I said in the previous recording that I had been observing you for a long time. Have you noticed that George is quite fond of you? To my shame, after George turned 3, I often took him to follow you. I told him, that aunt is so kind, look how loving she is. How about we let her be your mommy in the future? That's how I spent 2 years getting George to accept you. George needs a mother who truly loves him, and you need a child to heal your heart. I sincerely hope you can warm each other, and I also hope you can help me complete my revenge against Harriet. The evidence I've left behind is sufficient, but most importantly, you must be stronger than her. The recording stopped abruptly here. I sat in the darkness, tears streaming down my face. Anthony understood me better than I had imagined, and his plan was far more complex than I had thought. I could comprehend how much he had invested in it. In 5 years, Anthony's originally handsome face had become incredibly weathered. Though he had just turned 30, there were already several wrinkles on his forehead. That thick head of black hair had also become a Mediterranean-style bald spot, sparse and somewhat dry. If he hadn't said anything, I'm afraid I could never have merged him with the person he was 5 years ago. No wonder when he approached me, he only said, "I want to marry you, my son likes you." 5-year-old little George immediately settled into my heart. I dried my tears and walked to the window. The black car outside was still parked there, with figures faintly visible through the windows. I stared in that direction and slowly drew the curtains. At this moment, I was no longer the weak woman threatened by Harriet. In court tomorrow, I will show her a brand new Flora. I picked up my phone and sent a text to lawyer Tom, tell the accountant and Evan that we're ready for tomorrow. George will be there too. After sending the message, I glanced at the time, 2 a.m. Only a few hours remained until the court hearing. This war that had lasted for months was finally about to reach its final showdown. I lay in bed, imagining the scene of facing Harriet in court tomorrow. I was no longer afraid, with only one thought, for George, for Anthony's trust, and for myself, I must win. At 7 in the morning, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my collar. Today is the day of the final battle, there is no turning back, only the path to victory, I must win. Mom, I'm ready. George, wearing the small suit I had prepared for him, stood at the door waiting for me. His clear, big eyes shone with determination, making my heart ache yet touched. You're so brave. I knelt down to help him with his tie. Remember, no matter what happens, Mom will always be by your side. When we arrived at the court, lawyer Tom was already waiting for us. He looked serious. Harriet has strong momentum, she has brought 3 family elders to testify. It doesn't matter, there's only one truth. Holding George's little hand, I straightened my back and walked into the courtroom. The courtroom was packed, and Harriet was already seated in the plaintiff's stand, wearing a black suit, looking both sorrowful and dignified. The lawyer beside her was a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, looking down at documents. "All rise, the judge is entering." As the court clerk announced, everyone stood up. The judge was a woman in her 50s with a stern face and piercing eyes. The hearing for Anthony's inheritance and custody dispute now began. Harriet's lawyer spoke first, vividly portraying the tragic image of a mother forced to leave and returning to search for her child. Then, Harriet herself took the witness stand. "Your Honor," her voice choked with tears that came instantly, "our departure was not voluntary, but due to Anthony's domestic violence. I miss my son every day." She took out several letters and photos from her bag. "These are the letters I've written to George over the years, and photos of me missing my son while abroad alone. But Anthony never let my letters reach my son." Looking at those obviously newly fabricated evidence, I clenched my fists. After Anthony passed away, I immediately returned to my country to bring back my child. But Flora, an outsider, forcibly took possession of my son for money. Harriet pointed at me, her eyes flashing with hatred. "She has no motherly love for my son at all, she's just after the inheritance." Listening to these words that turned black into white, my heart raced, but I took deep breaths to remain calm. Then, several elders took the stand to testify, claiming that I didn't get along with George and often neglected his needs. I saw Flora yelling at George, an elderly woman said tearfully. The child was crying in terror, so pitiful. George, standing beside me, was completely confused by what he heard, his little hand nervously clutching the corner of my clothes. "Mom, they're lying." "Shoo, don't be afraid." I comforted him in a soft voice. Finally, it was our turn to present. Lawyer Tom stood up with a composed expression. "Your Honor, we will prove that what Ms. Harriet said is untrue and reveal the truth behind this case." Lawyer Tom first submitted a document. "This is George's adoption certificate, showing that Mr. Anthony legally adopted George from the welfare home after Harriet left." The courtroom was in an uproar. "Impossible." Harriet stood up abruptly. "This is forged. George is my biological son." The judge banged the gavel. "Order." Lawyer Tom continued. "We have more direct evidence." He turned on a recording device. Anthony's low voice echoed in the courtroom. "Harriet had an affair during her pregnancy and was preparing to abscond with the money. Just before she was about to leave, she went into premature labor, but the child unfortunately passed away. When she found out I had evidence of her affair and embezzlement, she had a mental breakdown, fled overnight, and took a large amount of company money." Harriet turned deathly pale and screamed, interrupting, "Shut up. This is all lies." The judge struck the gavel again. "The plaintiff, please remain quiet." Next, Attorney Tom submitted more evidence: Harriet's forged accounts, bank transfer records, screenshots of her chats with her lover, and the private investigator's report. Every piece of evidence was like a sharp blade, piercing through Harriet's carefully woven lies. Finally, Lawyer Tom played the recording of Harriet's phone call with her lover. "That fool Anthony, once I finish transferring the money, I'll come and join you." The courtroom was dead silent, everyone stared at Harriet in shock. She stood frozen for a moment, then screamed uncontrollably, "This is all fake. You're framing me together. George is my son." In the final blow, Attorney Tom submitted George's DNA test report along with Harriet's early medical records. These test results clearly showed that George and Harriet were not related by blood. Harriet completely broke down, frantically lunging at George. "Son, you recognize your mother, don't you?" George was so scared he hid behind me, sobbing softly. I looked coldly at Harriet. "Don't touch my son." The court quickly rendered its decision, dismissing Harriet's claims, confirming that George's custody rights belonged to me, and transferring the evidence of Harriet's alleged financial crimes to the police for handling. As two police officers stepped forward and placed handcuffs on Harriet, she was still hysterically cursing. I held George's hand and walked up to her, my gaze icy. "Ms. Harriet, the public funds you embezzled back then are all well documented. Anthony raising this child isn't just to spite you." Harriet was pale-faced, still looking back at George unwillingly as she was dragged away by the police officer, but the greed in her eyes was more obvious than the love. Walking out of the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly. George looked up at me. "Mom, did we win?" "Yes, sweetheart, from now on, no one can separate us." I watched as Harriet was escorted into the police car in the distance, feeling a sense of relief. The nightmare that had lasted for months was finally over. At that moment, Lawyer Tom walked over and handed me an envelope. "This is the last thing Mr. Anthony left for you. He said to give it to you after everything was over." I took the envelope and suddenly felt a shiver run through me. Anthony was indeed calculating. "Mom, let's go home." George looked up at me, showing the most relaxed smile he'd had in months. I nodded, with an indescribable feeling in my heart. The relief of clearing my name, the satisfaction of getting revenge, and the ease of finally being able to settle down. From today on, George and I are finally completely free. Late at night when all was quiet, I finally opened the letter Anthony had left for me. "Dear Flora, when you read this letter, everything should have settled. Thank you for fulfilling my unfinished wish, and I hope you can forgive my selfishness. I have many regrets in my life, but meeting you and George at the end of it is my greatest fortune. From now on, please live well with George and don't be bound by hatred and the shadows of the past. There are people in the company whom I trust the most, and they will help you get through the initial adaptation period. As for George, I know you will love and understand him more than anyone else. Finally, there is a secret I must tell you. George's biological father is the one who abandoned you back then. I've investigated your past and know that he took your child away. And that child was George. That is why George has a natural affinity for you." My hand trembled and the letter fell to the ground. I froze, unable to compose myself for a long time. No wonder I felt an indescribable closeness when I first met George. No wonder we got along so well. He is actually my biological son. 2 hot tears streamed down my cheeks. I remembered what Anthony had said to me before he passed away. You and George were meant to be together. How wondrous fate is, it took my child from me, and then returned him to me in this way. I quietly walked into George's room, looking at his sleeping little face. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting upon his fair cheeks. "My child, I have finally found you." Throughout this journey, from being treated as a mere tool, to becoming a weak person trapped in the mud, and then to a strong fighter who made a desperate comeback, I finally understand that sometimes life's blessings are hidden in the tests it gives us. Tomorrow, I will take George to the amusement park, listen to his laughter, and see his smiling face. Our future is still long, and this time I will firmly hold on to the happiness that belongs to us as mother and son.